One of the most popular educational channels on YouTube, in a nutshell, uploaded a video on addiction which was viewed about 4.5 million times in less than a month. Watch it first to get the context of this video. There are some fundamental flaws that could render the video very dangerous. I'm going to talk about all of them now. The video makes a fundamental mistake. Here's the clip.
The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection.
That is the conclusion of the video. So this video could make people think that just social connection is enough to pull a person out of addiction. Any researcher working in the field of addiction will tell you that that is inaccurate. The most effective way to treat addiction is by following a recovery pathway that takes into account the biological, psychological, and social factors. Social connectedness could definitely help, but it's only at the point if you're starting to take drugs. But once you cross a threshold, the following recovery pathway is extremely important to follow. I am basing my arguments on the science of addiction, which is based on evidence and data of people who got over addiction previously. I have consulted an expert in the field, Dr. Femke, and expressed my concerns about this video on addiction. Dr. Femke is a leader in addiction studies. She is an award-winning teacher and researcher at the University of Adelaide. She is also the head of the Behavioral Neuroscience Lab there. Here's what she had to say about the video. Dear Surya, thank you for sharing this. It is indeed quite simplistic. There are a few good points in there. Social connections are important, and people who do not have strong secure bond with people are more vulnerable to drug effects and addiction. However, assuming that they can easily switch to a strong bond is where this idea becomes too simplistic for me. My research focuses on how early social environment shapes the developing brain and our chance to get in trouble with drugs and alcohol. We are set up to bond, but we need to have positive early social interactions to learn that they are rewarding. If we miss this window, I think social interactions can be important, but it will be different. Weighing social and drug rewards are more likely to go in favor of drug rewards, as social relations do not have the same impact. Social integration, however, is important to help people succeed in remaining drug-free. Let me start unpacking the flaws behind each of the arguments made in the video. Point 1.
Here's how it works. If you use heroin for 20 days, by day 21, your body would physically crave the drug ferociously because there are chemical hooks in the drug. That's what addiction means. But there's a catch. Almost everything we think we know about addiction is wrong.
This is a too simplistic view. Continued use of drugs will alter the functioning of the brain itself. The brain will start to expect the drug and adapt to its continuous presence. If you suddenly stop using the drugs, then you'll face withdrawal symptoms and you will crave for the drug more. You will fall sick if you suddenly stop taking the drugs. This is the basic science of addiction. Saying that there's nothing inside the drug that makes us crave is factually wrong. Point 2.
If you, for example, break your hip, you'll be taken to a hospital and you'll be given loads of diamorphine for weeks or even months. Diamorphine is heroin. It's in fact much stronger heroin than any addict can get on the street because it's not contaminated by all the stuff drug dealers dilute it with. There are people near you being given loads of deluxe heroin in hospitals right now. So at least some of them should become addicts.
Okay, so let me show you some actual numbers on how much heroin patients are given in hospitals and how much heroin drug addicts take. Quantity of heroin used by hospitals is generally in the range of 5 mg to 20 mg a day. Even though people at home start taking about the same amount, they slowly get more tolerant to the drug. People turn addicts as they develop this tolerance. A drug addict might take about 500 mg to 2000 mg a day. The patients are given a very controlled dose, just enough to fade the effects of the pain. On the other hand, addicts take heroin to get high and get into the state of ecstasy. So comparing the two cases to draw a conclusion doesn't make much sense. Point 3.
The experiment is simple. You take a rat and put it in a cage with 2 water bottles. One is just water, the other is water laced with heroin or cocaine. Almost every time you run this experiment, the rat will become obsessed with the drugged water and keep coming back for more and more until it kills itself. In Rat Park, rats hardly ever use the drugged water. None of them ever use it compulsively. None of them ever overdose.
This research by Bruce Alexander has been very controversial. Apparently, some studies failed to reproduce the original results of this experiment. Professor Bruce's Rat Park funding was eventually withdrawn because it was contrary to the conventional view of addiction. So, using such a controversial research experiment to make an argument makes it a very weak argument. Point 4.
The Vietnam War. 20% of American troops in Vietnam were using a lot of heroin. People back home were really panicked because they thought there would be hundreds of thousands of junkies on the streets of the United States when the war was over. But a study followed the soldiers home and found something striking. They didn't go to rehab. They didn't even go into withdrawal. 95% of them just stopped after they got home. If you believe the old theory of addiction, that makes no sense. But if you believe Professor Alexander's theory, it makes perfect sense.
95% of the people who returned from Vietnam were no longer drug addicts. Hence, it must be social connectedness with the family that reduced addiction, right? Although on the first glance this statement may appear true, on deeper inspection looking into the research, I found that there is more to the story. Researchers such as David Neal tried to understand why this happens. The conclusion? Sudden change in environment was the major factor for this change, not social connectedness. The sudden change in environment removed all the cues that triggered heroin use. For example, when the soldiers see a tree or a tent, their behavior of taking drugs is triggered. To be more clear, if the family went to live with the soldiers at the war zone, it's unlikely that they would give up taking heroin so easily. It worked because the soldiers came back home. The soldiers also had friends when they were at the war. They used to smoke heroin together. It's not like they were completely isolated there. Maybe social connectedness played a role, but it is not the most significant contributor. The most significant contributor is the change in the environment. There could also be various other contributing factors such as the non-availability of drugs so easily. People could ask me, so what? What's wrong with this kind of understanding of addiction? Why are you so worried about it? Here's my response. People who watch the video could think that social connection is all that takes to get rid of drugs. That's what makes it very dangerous. Even though social connection plays an important role, this kind of understanding of addiction could be harmful. Let me give you some specific examples now. Case of a pregnant woman. Let's consider a pregnant woman who uses opioids. Pregnancy is a period where women are motivated to change their behavior. Thinking that all it takes to get rid of addiction is social connection, if she suddenly stops using opioids, it poses risk to the health of the child. It is very important to take appropriate medication to counter these effects. This is a very important point that the video does not mention. It also makes it look like drugs are very easy to get rid of. It makes people think that even if you use heroin for the decent amount of time, you can get rid of it right away by increasing your social connection. This is just not true. If you develop dependency on the drug, your body will actually crave for the drug and you need to consult a pharmacologist for advice. Just not try to work on improving your social connection. It could also make addicts demotivated. It could also raise the expectations of addicted people, making them feel that getting rid of drugs is easy. This is not necessarily a good thing. If they think that all it takes is social connection, they will try and they will possibly fail, and they will lose motivation and relapse into drug use. They won't try to quit again because they start to feel that it's impossible. People, from the very first point, have to know that it takes a lot of work to get out of drug addiction. There's a research study on people who tried to quit smoking, and this is the conclusion. It is unlikely that the individual will quit smoking in his first commitment. Quitting smoking needs several attempts. You will probably fail the first time, but you need to learn from your mistakes and commit yourself again, taking appropriate advice from doctors. This is the research-based optimal pathway for recovery from addiction, not just social connection. I have a lot of friends who have wonderful social connections but still are cigarette addicts. I also have friends who have become addicts because of negative social connections. After all, if all you needed was a better social connection, why would rehabilitation programs even exist? But one thing that I certainly agree with in the video is The way governments are treating people is not helpful. Drug addiction is seen as a moral weakness rather than a treatable medical condition. This has resulted in putting people in treatments against their will. The problem of drug addiction cannot be eradicated unless we start to think differently about addiction. Here's the conclusion. Social connection can help you only if you have not yet developed high dependency on the drug. Once you get over a threshold value, you will need to follow a recovery pathway to get out of it. After all, connection alone is not the opposite of addiction. So share this video with all the people you care about to stop the emanation of information that could be dangerous. Take this online course to understand the science of addiction and the best way to get rid of addiction. Managing Addiction, a Framework for Successful Treatment by the University of Adelaide on edX.